everyone. Welcome to Start Your Art. I'm your host, Misty Olson, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing and learning from Camilla Damsbo Brix. She is a Danish artist and teacher, and she's behind Camilla Damsbo Art. She teaches watercolor in such a playful, intuitive way, and she's just absolutely amazing at it. Hi, Camilla. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm just so thankful that you joined us today and are here willing to share your wisdom and your love and passion for the flowy watercolors that you do. That was like my main attraction to your artwork, is that you really made watercolor so playful and so fearless that it was just fun to actually play with, and you really took some of that fear away from me, and I'd love for you to share more about it. Can you tell us a little bit more how you started to play with watercolor and how you found this way to do it?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually started watercoloring when I had a great job as a project manager, and I went so much down with stress. So I was home for a month or two, just staring at the wall. And one day I realized that I had a box, one of those boxes, we all have them, from when we were kids, and they are filled with all these art materials that we never used because we went to college and stuff, and just started reading and forgot all about the brushes and paint. And I was like, oh, this box has been under my couch forever. Never thought about it. Okay, I'll take that out, and I just started painting, and it was fun, but so hard in the beginning because I really wanted it to look like something, and it never did. And then I started borrowing books from the library just to learn more, and they were all written by very old men. So I was like, is this just for old people? And thankfully I got into Instagram, where I found out that no, it's not just old people. It's actually, there's a lot of young people, but they have a little bit of a different style. And I think that's when I started just playing around and found out that I actually prefer doing this very loose style, that it's just so much more fun, and you can just relax a lot more than when you're doing these very intricate, detailed art pieces they take forever. And I have 2 kids. I'm never gonna have forever in time. So that's why I started doing this. I can do this while the kids are sleeping. So either talking to you or painting.
Yeah, and I think that really brings up a good point for us artists, is being able to work in a playful way, still create beautiful pieces of art, but really be involved with the life around us. I'd love to hear more how you kind of actually balance, work and your family and actually creating art for yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more of how you manage this?
Yeah, of course. In the beginning, before they went to kindergarten and daycare, I were on maternity leave. So every time they fell asleep, I was like, oh, where are my brushes? And you really have to make sure that it's right there. So when they're finally asleep, you can go directly either to sleep for yourself, which I did as well, but also just to grab your brushes, because if you have to figure it out, everything and what I'm gonna paint and where are my brushes and my paint, then they will wake up in a second. So that's what I did when I was on maternity leave. And now I take my kids to daycare around 8 a.m. and I can paint and work. And some days I pick them up before they nap, their afternoon nap, and some days I just pick them up a little later, or my mother-in-law picks them up, and I can have a long working day that day. So we try to combine it, but it's never easy to combine work and family. I think everybody struggles, even artists.
Yeah, that home work-life balance really is, I think like if any of us master it, that is going to be widely spread. Um,
Exactly.
I
I'm
would
gonna do a online course if I manage someday.
Yeah, no, I think that that's like one of my main things is like if I can get all my work done and be able to get a little extra time, I always try to go find something creative to learn or creative to do. Which leads me to some of the, I guess, more technical questions is like, can you, like, what kind of supplies do you actually use and what do you recommend for the style of watercolor that you teach?
It's a good question. I actually let's we can start by paint, which is well actually the most common question I think. I use Daniel Smith, and that's it's tube paint, but I squeeze them mostly into small pans and let them dry, and that way they last forever, which is amazing. And I really like these professional colors. I played a lot with the student grade as well before getting to the level I am now. But I found out that with the fluid, very watery watercolor I do now, I really need some pigmented color to actually stand out because it dilutes a lot in the water. I use so much water that it dilutes the paint. So if I want to avoid to make too many layers, I go with some of the higher quality paint. And for the brushes, I use a mostly the bigger the better. Of course, try to match it with my paper. So if you're using a very small paper, you just match your brush to that. But always start with a big brush, and I try to stay away from natural hair just because it's animal friendly and no squirrels has been killed. So I try not to work with natural hair. I do have a couple of them. They're also super expensive. So if my kids get into the office, that'll be a lot of money in no time if they find my supplies. So don't go there. I found some brushes that are synthetic that actually act like natural hair, which is great. And I can show you in the demonstration a little bit later.
Okay, yeah, that would be wonderful because I did have a natural hair. It was a squirrel brush. It was a squirrel mop brush that was actually gifted to me by a friend of mine whose grandmother had it. And that's how long that brush has lasted, but it's one that I rarely use. Well, first of all, because of my skill level, but I find it holds so much more water, and the bristles are so soft and flowy that I need something a little bit more hardness, not like hardness, but stiffness, I guess. So it holds shape for that fine detail. But yeah,
I totally get you. Yeah. And I know the feeling. I have a natural hairbrush here, and it's so soft. So you really need the synthetic ones as well, just to get that effect when you're using it on the dry paper, actually. Otherwise, you won't be able to get any details whatsoever.
Yeah, and that was just like a pleasant accident that I even found that, because obviously I didn't know much about the supplies. For, I guess, a little bit more about the pigments that you were talking about. So the professional grade gives you actually the most amount of pigment when you're using such watery consistency for. And I guess, do you like how many layers do you typically work when you're using such pigmented inks, I guess?
I think I use, well, it depends on the piece, of course, and how dark I want it to be. Mostly when I'm doing those very light pieces, I do a background or a first layer wash, which is very watery and dries super light. And on top of that, I can put my details and my shadows. So oftentimes I only work in 2 or 3 layers. But when I'm doing something very dark or very bright, I want to do more layers. But I try to avoid too many layers just to avoid overworking and make sure the kids are not waking up while I do it.
I totally understand that. So I guess my next question would be, do you actually work from lights to dark, or do you like to try to put your darks down first?
Depends actually. I usually do light to dark, and I like that a lot. But I think I'm not sure. I found a recent love for doing from going from dark to light as well. Mostly light to dark. That's so much easier. But I think it's so super fun to actually work in the dark first and create a negative shape, and you can kind of paint that thing in the middle as you go. So I think it depends a lot. But starting from dark is just hard when it's watercolor because well you ruin the light if you go to dark too soon.
Yeah, no, I really think that's like very intuitive when you're working from the darks, that you might be able to work more intuitively and then just work with that space that you have, the white space that's left on our pages,
Exactly.
versus when we work from the light to dark, where we can plan out and kind of guide our
Exactly.
day. Um,
I
I
I actually I try I mostly when I tend to overwork things, I do it when it's light to dark because you can really just keep going. It's just, oh, I can do one more, I could go a little bit darker here. And then you just, at some point, it's gone. You ruin it.
One of my favorite character watercolors that I did, I went one too much and it just like, but I kept that because it's like my favorite character I've ever done. But I tend to still overwork my watercolor just because I don't know when to stop. And I just want to go one more. What is, I guess, a helpful hint to help us not go that far?
It's such a good question. I actually asked another watercolorist that like a week ago. Um, of course, I do have hints as well, but or tips as well. Try to work your piece to like 80% done. When you feel like you're 80% done and you still feel like there's 20% missing, then stop and just put it away and come back tomorrow. And chances are pretty good that you were actually done. But you won't be able to see it before tomorrow. So try to work it to 80%.
That is actually a really good idea.
It's also very hard, so you have to practice it a lot.
Yeah, because there's one piece I got frustrated with because I couldn't figure out what was next, and I like put it away in the bottom of the drawer so I never have to see it again. But as I was cleaning and organizing, it came back out, and I'm just like, oh wow, this wasn't as horrible as I thought, and actually it doesn't need anything. Um,
Exactly.
so that's a really good point. Like, do you have any methods, like how would you suggest that you reach that 80%? Is it like you're stressed and you don't know which way to go, or you're just at a standstill? Could you describe that
I
a little
think
bit?
it's actually when you're at standstill, because that's when you are kind of starting to correct things. You know that point when you're like, oh no, I just put too much, or oh, I covered a white space, or you start to think too much and you start to correct. And when you start to correct, chances are pretty good that it'll be too, you lose the wetness of the page, and suddenly you start lifting stuff and you get all these horrible white, yeah, areas. Don't go there.
Actually, that's a really good idea, is like maybe stop when you are starting to correct and think more about your process than intuitively letting that flow. It's still really hard for me because even my watercolor training, it was all done like very slowly, strategically, in like hundreds of layers. It's like that real classical training of watercolor, and I
Yeah.
have not gotten past some of those habits of being able to work flowy. What was the biggest challenge for you when you went from that classical training to the watercolor to the flowy? Did you have lots of like missed pieces and things that you have like discarded since?
Oh, you should see my drawers. They're filled with horrible, horrible stuff, and I still do that. I think everybody creates bad stuff, and especially when you are trying something new, you have to just be fun with it and have fun, and just put it in the drawer and look at it in 1 year or two, and it'll be fine. I think you have to go through that transition, and I'm very much self-taught, so I haven't had a classical training at all, besides from Skillshare classes here and there, and I think I just experimented a lot before finding my style, and so of course that's create a lot of bad stuff, but it's so slowly I just transitioned into this style, and so it's actually not a transition from a classical style to a flowy style. It's more like very fluent, like watercolor, actually.
I can relate to that, and because once I put some things away, and I'm trying to do what I did instead of trying to do the images so much is really try to just work with the watercolor and like the shapes of my brushes to see what shapes kind of emerge out of it. And that's like one of like your Poppy's class. That was one of the loosest classes that I've ever had, but it's so amazing that even with just the impression that you can still get the image and you still know what is actually there. And I think that as well, I think that's one of the things that I love most about watercolor, because the less detailed it is, the better the watercolors are. And and so that was like one of the main attractions for the watercolor. And I thought like with acrylics, the more detailed you are, the more layers you have, the more depth that your work has, where I think it's just the opposite for the watercolor.
Yeah, I think you're right. And actually, the thing I love about watercolors is that you can go from super flowy to super detailed. And I think it's the contrast that makes it so amazing, that you can make all this flowy stuff, and then just one place or two places you have detail, and that's where you lead the eye. So that's so magical. And you can't really do that with acrylics because you haven't got that flowy, ethereal feel that you can lead people to the detail and the focal point of your piece.
Ethereal is the perfect word for watercolor. I know that you have created a fabulous lesson for us today. Can you share with us what we're going to be creating with you and some of the supplies that we're going to need?
Yes, of course. I'm gonna take you into let's give you a sneak peek of the magical universe of loose florals. And I can't wait to show you this. This is, here in Denmark, it's autumn, so there's sunflowers everywhere. And I love it. So I'm gonna show you how to paint loose sunflowers. And we're just gonna have fun, relax, and I'm just gonna try to guide you through without talking too much. Can't promise anything, sorry. But I'm just gonna show you how to paint sunflowers. So super fluent and loose. And we're going to do it with a something like this. So this is gonna be this is the natural hair brush look-alike that I talked about. So this is synthetic, but acts like natural hair, so it holds a lot of water. If you have natural hair, totally fine. And if you have synthetic, totally fine as well. We're gonna work with it. This is a 9. So if you have something that is a little big, that's great. And then I'm gonna do some details as well with a smaller synthetic brush. Have a nice tip so we have something to work with for the details. And this is number 4. So I'm gonna do those 2, and just whatever paper you have laying around, and then I'm gonna work with the yellows and the browns and all these beautiful autumn colors. Yes.
I love that. I'm so excited to dive into this lesson. I love sunflowers, so thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. I can't wait to show you.
Hi and welcome to this project. I'm just gonna dive right in and show you what you're going to use. First we have brushes, as I said before. It's a synthetic brush, but it looks like natural hair and acts like natural hair. Sizes 9 and 4. Then I have this cloth for dabbing water, and you can use tissue if you have that laying around. Either way works really well. Of course, water, filled with water here. And I have something you won't be able to see in the frame here, but this is a mist spray for flowers, and this is a small one as well. I'm gonna use both of them, and I'm sure you can find some in your local supermarket. I have some different paints. These are mostly Daniel Smith, and I'm just gonna tell you briefly about them. This is Burnt Umber, there's a New Gambos, this one was a Hansa Yellow Light, Sap Green, and a Payne's Grey. Yes, and the final one is actually Winsor Newton, and that is a Prussian Blue. I'm squeezed the tube paints into the pans and let them dry so they are good to go. And this is a great tip if you want quality paint that lasts for a long time. And this is the paper. It's cold press. It's 300 grams and it's Canson Heritage, 100% cotton. So it will take a lot of water. And I think that is the materials we're gonna need. Now I'm just gonna spritz the paint here with the big mist spray and we can dive in. And in front of me I have, you won't be able to see that, but I have flowers, sunflowers right in front of me. So I have a reference. I just went out in the garden and picked them, and you can of course find reference photos if you like. Just gonna turn it here so I have the right angle. Of course you can find reference photos on pages like Unsplash or Pixabay or something like that. Make sure you are free to use it. But you can also just go out and grab some flowers in a local store or in your garden. But sunflowers are very much in season right now here in Denmark, so I just went out and found some. Okay, I want to explain the mist spray for you. As you know, I'm very much a loose artist. I like to paint very, very loose. So one of the ways to force me to do that is actually to spray water on the page. When I do that, I get these random patterns where the paint will flow into the areas where I have my water. Remember, the paint will never go where there's dry land, unless of course you put it there. But it'll flow where there's water. So this is a great way to actually force me to loosen up. So I just went out and did the outer petals, beautiful yellow ones, and I just used both the New Gambos and the Hansa Yellow Light, kind of randomly. I'm not really thinking too much about it. Then I put some Burnt Umber in a circle, and then I'm just gonna put some Sap Green here in the middle. You can see how much white space I actually leave. I'm not using much of the body of the brush. I use the tip of the brush, but I do use the big brush here. I tend to start with the biggest brush I am comfortable with, and that way I can just be loose for a longer time. If you use a smaller brush, you will, well, at least I will tend to go more detailed, and I don't want that at this stage. I am going to use the smaller brush a bit later, but for now, the big brush is our friend. And you can see how I'm really just doing gestures here. I'm not doing too much of a filling out or outlines or anything. I'm just trying to think about the sunflower and how little I actually need to transfer this beautiful flower into a painting. I want to think about my how I'm gonna communicate with paint that this is a sunflower without giving up too much information. We want the viewer to think a little. And I know some of you are beginners, and probably a lot of you are beginners here, and this can look a little bit intimidating, and I'm working pretty fast, and I know that, and I do apologize. But I want to tell you that this is mostly meant as an inspiration for you to not fuss too much, because I did that when I was a beginner as well. I just focused so much on detail, and I think the magic about watercolor is that we can actually just go in and work with the flow and just enjoy the process. And of course we can enjoy the process with all the details and just diving extremely much in depth with the motif, and some people are extremely good at that and love that. But I really love to just put on some relaxing music and just have fun with dancing brushes, because that's actually what it is. It's just letting your brush dance over the paper and putting some paint down here. I'm just turning my flowers here again. And you can see how this flower is actually pretty loose, but already looking like a sunflower. Here I just spritzed with the small mist spray, and that's because I want this to be a little more or a little less defined. So I'm just gonna tip my page here, so some of the paint will just go with the water there, and just create some random patterns. Remember, this is the first layer. So we are going to let this dry and come back and define the shapes more. But for now, this is perfect. But we have no idea, of course, how this will turn out before the paint dries. Here I'm just working on a side view of a sunflower. And I haven't actually planned out this composition. I'm just going to go with the flow and see where it takes me. And this is actually one of the things I enjoy about watercolor, is that we can just go with the flow and try to relax. And while I'm actually narrating this, I wish I put a little bit of purple in here, but I haven't, and I will next time. The reason I wanted to do purple is because it's complementary to the yellow, and I think it would actually be a really good contrast. But here I just used the Prussian blue for the colder tones, especially inside of the sap green, just to break up that very bright green and get some cooler tones as well. When I'm working with a motif that is so warm, the sunflower with the yellows and the browns are super warm, and actually the green is warm as well. We really need a contrast, and I think the Prussian blue goes in and helps us with that. Also, I am adding a few places with the Payne's Gray, which is a beautiful bluish gray, which is also a little bit cool. But I do regret not adding a little bit of purple, but sometimes it's good to watch a video like this afterwards, and you can reflect, be wiser afterwards. So I think that is good. And if you can hear some weird sounds, that's just because I actually accidentally sat on my cat, who was laying right behind me on the chair. So sorry about that. I'm trying to sit next to her instead, on her. I'm doing a side view here up in the top of the page as well. And you can see how little I am going in detail here. I want my focal point to be the front flower, the one looking straight at us. So these flowers in the back are just for the composition and just to, well, make sure I haven't just got one. Sometimes it's really good to have different views of a flower, just to kind of honor the flower that you have. You're not just looking straight at it. I know when you are drawing a flower as a kid, you'll always draw this round shape with the petals, which is the front view. But I think it's important that we honor the entire flower, and often also, I haven't done that in this painting, but I often incorporate a bud and a withered flower as well, just to show the entire lifespan of the flower. I think that's so important. But in this flower painting, I'm just going to show you the sunflowers, and that's mostly because I actually picked them up in the garden. They're not withered yet, so I'm pretty sure I'll draw these a little bit later and get that withered look as well. This is actually a bud. I am just doing a small gesture here with the brush, just a little bit of green in on the outside of them. So that wasn't much. You can see how light I'm just working, and how this is just super random. Just spritzing some water here, and I do apologize for lifting this out of the frame, but I just wanted to mess it up a little bit more. I think we can let it dry now, and we can come back to it and see how it'll look. Now we let it dry, and I just checked that it was dry just by touching with my hand, and if it's still cold, it is not dry. So make sure it's dry completely. Now I'm going in. You can see how it really dried up very light, and there's not much of the flower shape left, so that's totally fine. This will create that ethereal look that we're going for, so don't worry. Now I'm going in with the Damsbo mostly, and just painting the flower again. And you can see I'm holding my brush a little bit tighter this time. It's closer to the bristles, because this time I actually want to shape my flower. In the first layer I held my brush fairly high on the handle because it was so loose, and I knew the paint would spread anyway in the water, so it was totally fine to just let go. But now I want it to be a little tighter, and I want this to actually be looking like a sunflower. So you can see I'm just doing these shapes, and I'm not doing any perfect petals. I'm doing these. You can see how they're all different. I can't really explain what this shape is because it's kind of like a semi-flat worm, which is not making any sense. But if you look at a picture of a sunflower, it will make sense. So I'm using a fairly big amount of paint, or pigment, not much water, because the yellow is pretty. It can be a little hard to transfer into a painting because it's so light. So I want to be using a lot of pigment to make sure the paint goes through and reads as the petals. Now I switched my brush to the fine tip brush and the burnt umber. You can see I'm doing a lot of small marks here to show the center of the flower. And I'm showing you this in real time, so I do apologize if it's a little bit boring to look at all these spots, but it's necessary. It can be tempting to just draw a round circle and you'll be done with it, but by making this, all these dots, you create a texture and you preserve the white spots. Just adding a little bit of yellow as well into the mix. It's always good to mix up your colors while you go, and you can see I'm not touching or mixing on the paper. I'm just putting down the paint and letting it mix by itself. Here I am going in with the sap green and doing these small strokes. Before it was dots. Here I'm just doing small strokes, and that's because the texture in the center are a little bit different than the texture in the outer circle. So here I'm just doing more strokes, and now we have a texture in the center, and you can immediately see that this has created a focal point for our painting, because we have so much detail now in the center of the flower, and now we want the viewer to be guided into the center, and we are doing that by adding more detail towards the center, if that makes sense. We you don't want to go extremely detailed on the background flowers, for example, because then the people would look there, and we don't want that. We want people to start from the outer edge and then go into the center of the flower, which is the focal point. So try to keep that in mind when you are doing this. I just added a little bit of Payne's gray here as well, so there's more shadow, and just dragged some of it out on the petals, so we have some shadow on some of the yellow petals as well. And if you feel like there's too much shadow on the yellow petals, just take a damp brush and lift it up. You can totally do that after you just put it on. Just make sure it's not beginning to dry, then it'll be super hard to do that. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can do something about the greens here, because I want some of this green to actually be leaves, and I want some of it to be stems. So I'm trying to see where can I put a stem and where can I put a leaf. And I'm actually going to do this in a negative painting style. And if you're new and are thinking, Camilla, what the hell is, and I do apologize for cursing, what is a negative painting style? That is when you are painting around the subject. The main flower here is, or the main motif here is the flower, and that is our positive space, that is our motif. But there's a lot of things around the motif, which is the negative space, and I want to emphasize the flower by painting in the negative space. And I also want to create some petals as a positive by painting around them. I hope it makes sense. I have a YouTube video on it, on the subject, if you want to check that out, which explains it a lot better than I just did there. So check that out if you want to develop it further. But you can also just watch what I do. It can be a little tricky, that process, because sometimes it's hard to not see the actual flower. Often we just want to paint a leaf and be done with it, but here we have to kind of paint around it and just let it emerge from itself, and that can be tricky. We kind of have to think backwards. It's fun though. It's like almost like puzzles or a treasure hunt, where the treasure is the leaves that we find. You can see how that leaf just appeared. actually really like how this is turning out, so I hope we will hope it'll continue being good, because I like how it's working out at the moment. And of course you can totally just do you can totally do positive and negative leaves as well. Often it just gets even more fun when you are combining the two. But just try not to overdo it, and leave something to the viewer's imagination. That way we will create some interest in the painting and let the viewer stay here longer, because they are thinking, what is going on here? And they get curious as to what is happening. And you can see how there's the stems are actually shaped almost like a V, if that makes sense. You can see how there's two stems that goes down, and they are kind of narrow at the bottom and going up like a funnel up towards our flowers. And that's unintentional, but I see it now, and I actually really like it because it moves the viewer upwards. Again, it's good to see this in a video afterwards. You can see I'm slowly building up the intensity of the colors. Here I just lifted some colors that shouldn't be there. But you can see I'm just adding more and more dark to create a darker and more bright color. And remember, this is only our second layer, and I'm not gonna add even more layers. I'm only gonna add this because I don't want to overdo it. And I want this to be it's gonna be possible to accomplish even for a beginner. And I know if you're a beginner, you're probably not gonna get this result first. Probably not gonna get this if you're not a beginner either, because we all paint differently. But I want to encourage you to try to be more loose, because it's so fun. And when you are being loose, you actually just let go and hopefully not get too frustrated, but be comfortable in this style, because it really is fun. But you have to kind of trust the process. And I do apologize for rambling. I always seem to come up with stuff. It just pops into my head, and I really have to tell you guys when I narrate my videos. And I do that a lot. I have an entire school, so there's a lot of videos there, and I really love loose florals, and I have a class coming up on loose florals that I can't wait to show you guys. If you sign up for my free gift, you'll get a bit information of that as well. So yes, here I'm just adding a little bit of darkness in the center. And you can see if you just work around the entire image, you can just wait for it to dry a little and work on something else, and just kind of build the entire painting as we go. And here I'm just adding even more color to my petals here. As I'm doing this, I'm really building up the intensity of the colors, and you can see how vibrantly it's standing out now. Just adding a bit of Payne's gray here actually. It did turn out a little bit dark, but that's totally fine. We have shadows on some petals, and shadows are allowed. We don't need a perfect yellow flower for this to be beautiful. I think the beautiful thing in watercolor also often happens in the contrast, so somewhere between light and dark is perfect. Just spritzing again. And if you're not sure when to spritz, just do it when you feel like something needs to be softened. Here, this was actually pretty dry, so I'm just adding a little bit of paint for the water flow, because I wanted to have a soft ethereal look here. And I mostly do this in the first layer, but sometimes it's in the second layer as well. Just trying to get rid of those small droplets there, but I'm just gonna take a bit of tissue here and dab it. Here you go. And that'll just create a beautiful light, super light color. But it also made my sunflower a little bit more moody, or I'm not sure. Well, diluted, maybe, actually. Well, I'm gonna work on another area and see if it needs strengthening. I'm actually going to do a leaf in a positive style here, just to get some dark contrast. And I'm gonna do that up here as well. You can see I can paint around some of the yellow petals, and that way make them stand out even more. While painting petals, so or painting leaves, so that's pretty cool. It's like a win-win situation. And I'm just gonna add a little bit of dark color as well to these leaves, so we haven't got just one color. I'm almost always mixing colors in the wet paint. I think that technique is called charging. I'm pretty sure it's called that, and I use it a lot. So you can Google it if you wanna read more about it. You can see I actually added a little bit of leaf pattern to that leaf there, and just having these veins showing. And I wouldn't recommend doing that on all the leaves. That would get way too much detail. But you can do it with a few, and try to see if you can place them strategically towards the center and the focal point. And now I'm just evaluating and looking at my piece and trying to see where it needs something else. And this is the time where when you take yourself, give yourself a break. You want to be really, really sure that you actually need to add more, because chances are you don't. You want to stop when you are feeling like it's 80% done, and I really have to be careful now. You can see how little I'm actually doing right now, and that's because I'm unsure. And at that point, you want to stop and let it dry and come back to it. I'm just adding a little bit more, but being super careful not to overdo it. Just adding splatters because I love splatters. But besides from that, I'm trying to stop myself and just trying to evaluate the paper here. And I think we can call it done. I'm just gonna spritz here because that was looking a little bit weird, and that is looking a little bit. See, that's what happens when you overdo it. I should just stop. Okay, it's not horrible. I'm just lifting up where the blue hit the yellow, and I think that is it for now. Yes, I'm gonna stop myself and you can get a look at the final results. Now here is the final painting all dried up and next to our reference. You can see how the focal point is super clear with all the details in the center, and the background flowers are kind of supporting it along with the negative painted leaves. I love this and I really hope you enjoyed the process as well, and maybe you want to tackle it too. Oh, and that's my cat. I'm gonna let her say goodbye and thank you for watching.
Perfect.
Thank you, Camilla. This was absolutely so fun to get to explore and to actually create with you today. I know that you have created a really fun gift for our audience. Can you share more about what you created?
Yes, of course. I can show you. Here you go. This is puppies. And this is a transparent puppy. And I created this lesson to show the transparency of watercolor and actually let it play in these beautiful puppies. I love puppies, and this is one of my favorite flowers, so I can't wait to show you this. And you'll be able to find it on the link that Misty will give you. But yeah, there you go. It's actually a lesson you'll get for free on my online school. And there's so many other lessons, but this one is free just for you. So I hope you'll check it out. And I really think this is a great technique, both for, of course, puppies. They are super transparent, but also a variety of other flowers. So you have to check it out.
Thank you so much, Camilla. I absolutely loved your Poppies course. You can find Camilla online and you will be able to find her links right below her art session today. Thank you so much for joining us, Camilla. I hope you have like a wonderful day. And everyone, don't forget, Camilla and I will be into the Facebook today, just playing around, doing her lesson, and we will see you guys then.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.